Gaelic Storm playing music today. I think between Mike Bowen, Judy Patrick, and myself, we could be our own Gaelic Storm, couldn't we?
Beautiful
Absolutely.
music.
Great stuff. Absolutely terrific. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the panel. It is the 15th of June. It is a Thursday, and it's 15 minutes past the hour of 9 o'clock. We are very happy that you're with us and certainly appreciate you taking the time out. We welcome you to join us. You can, throw your hat in the ring and make a comment or ask a question or be snarky or whatever, and we may or may not respond to it, but you can give it a shot. It's panel@wamc.org, panel@wamc.org. Seriously, we do like your letters. We try to get to as many of them as we possibly can, and we will get to those in just a little while. Let me introduce everybody to you, and then we'll get started with the items on the docket. We begin with Tetherless World Chair of Computer, Web, and Cognitive Sciences and founding Director of the Future of Computing Institute at RPI, also known as Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. Jim Hendler, good morning.
Good morning.
Really nice to have you.
Yeah, well, I'm always jealous because Rob Griffin always has some really clever thing to say when you ask how he is in the morning or introduce him. So I'm not that clever, so I asked ChatGPT what I should say.
Good.
And it said my answer for today is I'm chilling like a snowflake in Albany. I have no idea what it means, but I'm going with it.
Wow. This is that's a good point to make, Jim, that this is our future. This is what is going to guide us forward.
You might prefer its later edge. I asked it for another one. It says,
Good.
as unpredictable as a politician's promise in Albany. That one might be more appropriate.
Well, yeah,
for
I
the
think that
show.
is more appropriate. Absolutely. We can lie with the best of them. VP for Editorial Development at the New York Press Association, Judy Patrick. Good morning, Judy. How are you?
Good morning. I've got nothing witty. I've got nothing. Beautiful June
Save
day.
it for the show. It's all good.
We just did the media project. We had a great media project. Sunday at 6, Monday at 3.
Yeah, and that's great. Good. It's you, Ian
And
Pickus,
Rex. Just
Rex
three
Smith.
of us.
So you get a lot of good quality time.
Oh, yeah. We talked about
that's good.
UFOs, believe it or not.
Oh, we talked about that the other day on this show. It was great. That was a request, a panelist request by Rosemary.
I think
Mayo.
it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that.
It was very good. Mark, it seems like it's been a long time since I've seen you, but Mark Wittman is an investment banker, Wall Street investment banker. He also procures us donuts regularly, and we're more than a little happy, not just to have him here, but for the baked goods as well. How are you?
I'm good, Joe. I'm good. I'm happy to bring in the baked donuts. I'm a big believer in this place's mission, and I must say, everyone here, since I first started coming about a year ago, has always been so kind. So it's nice to be able to reciprocate. You're right. I haven't been here. You guys had important business to
that's right.
tend to. And, of course, you kept me out of the building while that was going on, which is probably safe.
By the way, and just so you know, if you want to meet, the grouches, Mike and I can bring you around to the people that you probably won't like, right? Yeah, not everybody's nice. Yeah, no, we would have no problem with that. Well, good morning. It's a delight to have you all here. So let's talk about what's going on. I think this is interesting. A week has gone by, or almost a week since the indictment was announced for former President Trump in Florida on the documents case. And then since then, there were these various incarnations of the story that we have covered over the last several days. So, for example, Monday was then that Friday was the actual indictment was unsealed, and we got an idea of what was going on there. Then, of course, Tuesday was the big day, was the day that he went to court. And entered a plea of not guilty. And so every day there's another little thing to look at. Well, now we've talked about the judge in the case, but there's some interesting information about the judge, and I think it's worth discussing that of where we are. Again, we touched on this yesterday, but we'll get a little bit more involved in it today. This from the New York Times. That Aileen Cannon, the federal district court judge assigned to preside over former President Donald Trump's classified documents case, has scant experience running criminal trials, calling into question her readiness to handle what is likely to be an extraordinarily complex and high-profile courtroom clash. End of sentence, period. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. Judge Cannon, 42 years old, has been on the bench since November 2020 when Mr. Trump gave her a lifetime appointment shortly after he lost re-election. She had not previously served as any kind of judge, and because about 98% of federal criminal cases are resolved with plea deals, she has had only a limited opportunity to learn to preside over a trial. Judy Patrick, let me ask you first. Would the New York Times ever write this if it was a male attorney or a male judge?
Oh, interesting question. I think they, I think they would have. I think that they approached this. I think there have been some concerns raised about Judge Cannon, especially because of her earlier decisions, and that the upper courts overturned.
And the fact, and I guess when you get into it, of the Trump, the reason that Donald Trump would have placed her where she was placed and picked where she was picked and when she was picked, that would also add into that as well. A Bloomberg Law database lists 224 criminal cases that have been assigned to her, and a New York Times review of those cases identified 4 that went to trial. Each was a relatively routine matter, like a felon who was charged with illegally possessing a gun, and all the 4 cases added up to 14 trial days. Judge Cannon's suitability to handle such a high-stakes and high-profile case has already attracted scrutiny amid widespread perceptions that she demonstrated bias in the president's favor. Last year, when she oversaw a long-shot lawsuit filed by Mr. Trump challenging the FBI's court-approved search of his Florida home and club Mar-a-Lago, which this amazes me, and I know we've had lawyers on the show over the last week that have told me that this is not that unusual, but it still seems to me unusual that when we do all of these things of recusal and so forth, well, she screwed up on an aspect of this case, and then they're letting her go back to oversee the case, which seems somewhat incredible to me, Mark Wittman.
I'm actually very relaxed about this. Jack Smith knew that he had a 1 in 4 chance that this woman would end up as the trial judge if he filed where he did, and he still decided to file where he did. I think this woman was deemed as at least qualified, if not better, by the panel of lawyers that looks at these things. She was approved by the Senate. Yes, she's what we'll term a young or mid-career professional. But I thought the New York Times article actually went overboard. I could hear the grindstone against the axe when they were saying things like, well, she's going to have to come up against all these unprecedented questions. And then they talked about the questions, including the attorney-client privilege and the use of that information and others. And the whole time I'm thinking, well, if you're her, you're already back with your more experienced colleagues talking about, well, how do I anticipate these things? My son and I watch sports together, and he plays sports. And a lot of times I tell him, some days you got to be good enough to beat the other team, and sometimes even the referee when they make mistakes, obviously innocently. And you know what? If the case against Trump is as good as everyone says it is, then there should be no trouble beating the defense attorney and a referee that might or might not make a mistake here. I'm not worried at all. I thought the New York Times article was sexist, and I thought it went overboard.
Jim Hendler.
I'm somewhere in the middle on this one. I actually probably tend towards Judy in thinking that if this had been a Trump-appointed judge of any kind who had that previous ruling, they would have done some kind of analysis. But I think in this particular case, the lack of time in the courtroom for these kind of trials is the new piece of information. I think, that people thinking, okay, so this is an experienced judge who just happens to be in Trump's favor is different from the idea that this is someone who just really is going to be having to deal with some very complex issues. And I think what makes this so important is that in this case, timing is going to be so crucial. Because if it moves quickly, you have a very different political outcome than if it moves slowly, right? And I think we're going to see a lot of that. Yesterday, there was a story on all of the Republican nominees, with I think one exception, saying that the first thing they would do their first day in office is pardon Trump if he was indicted, right? I mean, that kind of thing. I mean, it's really... It's going to run into that if Trump is elected and then and I don't mean indicted, convicted, then you're going to get into that whole constitutional issue of pardoning himself. I mean, there's just so many aspects of this that are unprecedented and new. And I don't know. I guess I would be a lot happier if this was in front of somebody who had really had a lot of experience in the courtroom and was going to run the case.
Right. A judge does have a big impact on whatever during a trial. I mean, if anybody who's watched Law and Order knows that the judge, rules on motions all the time. But to do a story, a preview story about whether or not the judge is hard hitting or how a judge runs the courtroom is a common journalistic practice, especially when you're dealing with a big case like this. I think. I
mean, this is a huge case.
Kind of
this
a big case.
A big deal. So it seems that asking a question about background, and I don't know. It's I was reading it from the New York Times about 225 cases and only 4 went to trial. Most pilots don't get behind a plane and actually land it until there's passengers on board. So, there has to be a point where obviously they're trained prior to that, but it's simulated. And so, there has to be a point where you have to actually do it. And, where are you going to get the experience if they don't allow you to get the experience?
But the system doesn't work in a way that we say in this country where the legal system says, let's look at the most consequential cases and only give those to the senior judges. That's not how the system works. The system, I guess, assigns the responsibility to some computer. Jack Smith knew what he was dealing with.
We can blame AI.
Yeah. But my point is,
I'm happy to say this one wasn't AI.
if particularly, by the way, if you're rooting for a conviction here, you're either with our system or you're not. So I'd suggest you stop it right now in terms of complaining about the system.
I say that again. I'm not sure I understand.
If you're rooting for conviction and you're saying once he's convicted, you're like, look, this is our system. We played it down the middle. He's convicted. Let's get on with it, right? You can't start by saying, well, maybe this judge isn't the right judge. You either believe in this legal system or you don't. And she's been deemed qualified to sit in that position, and she was assigned the case via the means that they typically sign these cases, and here we are.
I understand, and I very rarely invoke this phrase on this program, but just to play devil's advocate, and the reason I invoke it is because, not quite sure I understand now. I understand, but I just don't know. I don't know. It's kind of a fool's errand sometimes. But you wouldn't do that with your surgeon. Like if somebody's going to come in and work on you, you would say, oh, maybe I'll get a second opinion. And when you have a consequential case and you don't have the ability like you do as a patient to say, oh, I would like this person or that person or maybe someone else from another hospital to come in and take a look and see what they think, and then you make the decision, okay, this is who I'm going to go with. So I think that's another side to it. I mean, of just the operating under your assumption, and I don't know that it's a bad assumption, but again, to play devil's advocate, that is to say then all 4 of those attorneys would be qualified to do the job.
Well, my issue is this: in a surgeon, you only have one pair of hands, inside the body. This woman, this judge, is not going to be sequestered, right? The jury may be sequestered, but she's not going to be sequestered. So if at noon on Thursday next week, or when the trial starts in however many months, 8 months from now, there's some issue, she's allowed to call a recess, and she's allowed to phone a friend, check a law book. I mean, it's not the same as a surgeon.
I don't know if judges do that though.
I suspect. I suspect so, and if they don't, they should. And she's.
I think what you're going to see happen one way or the other, okay, whatever she rules, right, both sides are going to be willing to take that up to the next level court. The next level court is a conservative court, 2 out of 3 were appointed by Trump. Smith has the ability to go there and say, hey, as in the last case, right, this is a ridiculous ruling. We're appealing that ruling or asking for recusal. I think the fact that they're not starting that way is a smart move. I think that was said yesterday, and I just want to reinforce it. The idea that playing this as fair as possible, using the rules, so I'm with you on that one, is important because with all the claims that this is politically motivated and that different people are treated different ways, making sure that this one is played fair and square, I think, is really important.
Now, what do you think, America? Let us know. Panel at WAMC.org, panel at WAMC.org will continue after this news from the BBC.
Jump in and take my hand.
You can listen to that all morning. Good morning. Welcome back to the Roundtable. No offense to you all. Panel at WAMC.org, panel at WAMC.org. Listening to the Roundtable panel this morning, and we would love to hear from you. Panel at WAMC.org. And we'll get to letters very, very soon, and we welcome yours. I guess the last thing I would like to talk about is the chance that will there then be some action? Is there any indication that there will be action to try that she will recuse herself or that they will shop for another judge?
There's always that option. The other thing I've heard is that Jack Smith, the special prosecutor in the case, he also has something in his back pocket, which is, if you read the indictment, Trump is not being charged with disseminating the information of telling anyone else about it because that happened in New Jersey. So that dissemination charge could be filed in New Jersey. It's also always possible.
Take that show on the road.
Yeah, well, and I also think, it's a very strong case, so a lot is going to depend on how it plays out. But I think if you got a conviction with this judge politically, that would be huge, right? And I think he's willing to take the chance, knowing that he has all these options to go to go to the appellate court, do things. I don't think she's going to recuse herself. I think that would be a
you have to
mistake
understand
in a lot
that
of ways,
a conviction with a fairly significant number of people in this country is not going to matter one way or the other.
Right.
They will support him no matter what.
Said another
sobering.
way. But said another way, if the prosecution is sitting outside this courthouse, crying because it couldn't secure a conviction, and it blames the judge, right? You shouldn't have brought this in the first place. If this is such a slam dunk case, then this potential margin of complication should not matter.
All right, lots of letters. We go to Beth, who says, does anyone else find it strange that the judge presiding over Trump's federal trial was randomly chosen to preside over this case and was previously chosen randomly to make rulings pertaining to earlier aspects of this case? Seriously, what are the odds?
So I actually heard a long discussion of this, and it looks like Mark was going to jump in and beat me to it. But it's actually depending on exactly which person you listen to, which analyst, the chances were actually pretty high because it's not the 25 or however many judges it is in Miami. It's the ones who hear Palm Beach cases, and that's a much smaller number. So depending on how you compute exactly the odds, it was either 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. So we're talking about a pretty high likelihood it was going to be this judge. It really wasn't a surprise, and the prosecutor knew that. So he must, have known that this was a high probability.
Susan writes, I don't believe this judge will be fair and impartial. She has already demonstrated bias towards Donald Trump and a disregard of the law. The New York Times article said she bristles when told she's wrong. It's highly unlikely she has been chastened by the overruling of her decision earlier in this case. I fully expect her to rule in Trump's favor, no matter how unsound the legal argument. Well, we have to have faith in the system, right?
And I will say that most judges bristle when they're told they're wrong. I mean, they all hate to be overturned.
I think most people bristle when they're told they're wrong. I mean, I don't.
No,
think
you're
that's-
wrong about that.
Right. I don't think it's just judges. I think that's just human nature that you do tend to bristle. Let's see. Adam writes, so how often do defendants stand before judges that they appointed? There might be some issues here involved in trusting the system that call for variation from the norm in order to account for the extraordinary. It's a fair point.
It is a fair point. The other thing that I thought would happen is anyone charged with a crime now can say they're running for president and say they shouldn't be prosecuted because they're running for president or governor or something like that. Because I think that Trump declared his candidacy in large part because he could use this as a strategy to deflect.
Well, that's why I keep on having such trouble with this notion that Republicans are throwing out left and right about how a sitting president has no right in their Justice Department to go after someone, a political opponent, and someone who held the office before them. But isn't that the way that's usually going to work? I mean, otherwise you're saying, okay, we're going to wait 8 years and let it go until then. I realize this is complicated by the fact that Trump is the front runner and is running again for the 2024 election. But regardless, when do you take care of it? Like, that is when you have to do it. There really is no other option there.
Right, and there's statute of limitations as well.
By the way, to the letter writer's point, the solution, if you don't want him before a judge that he appointed, is to say, well, then we have to only include Democratic judges in the pool, or would you include past Republican appointees as well? It starts to get into either believe in the integrity of our system or you don't, and if you do, we're on the right path.
I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree with your slippery slope on that one, right? Because I think the letter writer does have a point that is worth being considered. Okay, so if you have, and let's put it in New York State context, right? Cuomo is involved in a lot of legal situations with judges who are on the New York State bench approved by Governor Cuomo. Now, again, so far we haven't seen that happen. But, that would be the kind of case where suddenly you're asking the question, should this person be judged by? So it's not a Republican or a Democrat or something. If it was, if it had been, a Nixon appointee who's still around, or pick your favorite Bush appointee, I don't think you'd be having this question. But when you're talking about the person who was directly picked and approved by the person standing in front of them, that does feel to me like a conflict of interest.
I get the issue. The problem is you've already blown the whistle and started the contest. If you wanted to have that provision employed, you'd have to have had it in place before it started.
True. No,
right?
Agreed. Absolutely. I always love it when panelists who have a day off still chime in and join us. So John Faso writes to us and says, much is made that Judge Cannon was nominated by Trump. However, nominations for federal judiciary are made per recommendation of the senators from the state. In this instance, Senators Rubio and Scott. I don't know which senator or if both recommended Cannon, but that is more significant than the fact that the nomination came from Donald Trump. In New York State, with 2 Democratic senators and the president a Republican, the senators and the administration work out a deal so that some are put forward by the senators and some per a recommendation of the president of the opposite party. Too much is made of whether someone is a Biden or Trump or Obama judge, etc. It often and usually doesn't tell us much about how a particular judge got to the position.
Yeah, just as background, I believe the Time story in this case said that she was actually asked to put forth her nomination or at least put her name into a pool of those who would be vetted by Rubio. So perhaps that's where the genesis of her appointment came from.
John writes, why are these lifetime appointments anyway? What justification is there for that?
So that's a good question. The theory behind it in the Constitution was for the highest judges. It was so they wouldn't be political, i.e., once you were appointed, you were there for life, so you wouldn't have to worry about keeping the person who appointed you happy and things like that. We have a really odd system in this country because there's state-by-state rules. So some places you elect judges, some places you appoint judges, some places it happens purely through the legislature, things like that. At the federal level, it's a little bit of a mess in terms of how it happens because, as you say, it comes up through the state, but then but Fassa didn't quite mention, but then it goes through the whole Senate approval, then the president has to sign off on it. So it's a multi-level thing. And, there have been a lot of discussions about, for example, why not make Supreme Court justices, and therefore one would assume other federal appointees, a 15-year appointment or a 15-year renewable once if the person's younger. Because you take someone who's 40, you put them on the bench, and they're there for another 30 years and to many more than that, depending on, there's nothing that forces them to leave. And we've seen that now both in Congress and in thing. And, no ageism here. I'm getting to the age where I would be suspicious. But, again, I think a lifetime appointment is, in modern terms, is a strange thing. When the Constitution was written, you didn't have a lot of people who were living to their 70s, 80s, 90s, right? So a life appointment for a judge was a 10 or a 15-year appointment in a lot of cases, right? I think that's a place where modernizing the law might want to be looked at because when we're talking in the next generation about people having an average lifespan that could start breaking 100 years, right? That starts to get very strange when you talk about lifetime appointments.
Two different perspectives from two different listeners. Claire writes, Jack Smith is in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. If he accepts Cannon and she is overly favorable to Trump, that will be criticized. If he is successful in getting her recused, if he so desires, he will be accused of weaponizing the Justice Department. How can he win? And then Paul counters with, is there any possibility that Jack Smith is really happy that this is the judge? Possible he knows that the case is so open and shut that he is not worried about a conviction, but looks forward to a more lenient sentencing by this judge to avoid all the pitfalls that would occur if years in prison were handed down.
Yeah, I think Jack Smith ran all the probabilities in his head before he filed this in Florida, and he recognizes this. He also, the indictment is pretty clear, is pretty damning, but I can imagine that he has more evidence to show us yet, and he must be very confident in his case.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue. We have many more letters. We'll discuss this further. We certainly invite you to write those letters. panel@wamc.org, panel@wamc.org, and we'll continue right after this.
You're not just out of my league, you're out of this world. Shine on, shine on, shine on.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Roundtable and to our panel discussion. Judy Patrick, Mark Wittman, and Jim Hendler with us this morning. And one of the things I want to introduce into the conversation as we continue, and we'll go through more letters. We welcome yours, panel@wamc.org. We have been hearing stories that have been coming out from, there's a pretty good one in the Washington Post this morning about Trump rejecting the efforts of his lawyers to avoid the indictment, to settle, to say, okay. And this has come up a couple of times where they've said, well, it looks bad, so you may want to settle. Now, I don't know. I was not in the room. I have no idea. It does, as an outsider looking in, seem odd to me that they would say settle, he would say no, and then the attorneys are fired. So who knows how that works out? But the attorney, Christopher Kise, wanted to quietly approach justice to see if it could negotiate a settlement that would preclude charges, hoping that Attorney General Merrick Garland and the department would want an exit ramp to avoid prosecuting a former president. Kise would hopefully, quote, take the temperature down, he told others, by promising a professional approach and the return of all documents. But Donald Trump was not interested after listening to other lawyers who urged a more pugilistic approach. So Kise never approached prosecutors. 3 people briefed on the matter said a special counsel was appointed much later. I don't know what that would look like, right? A settlement.
Well, before the indictment, a settlement would have been something which said, okay, look, let's make this whole thing go. A good example of that was the fraud case on his university in Florida, which, if that had been dragging on in the courts during his first election, could have given some ammunition to his opponents. So he settled for $25 million, got that out of the way. We're not talking very much about the New York civil case on the sexual abuse charges. Again, they didn't make that one go away, but they got that one down to a civil case. So I think that, there was a time where that could have been. But once I think the indictment was out, it was too late. Besides, Trump is having I won't say fun, but, kind of the ego boost of he's getting up there and he's saying Jack Smith is a thug and a lunatic. And, he's actually forced Merrick Garland, who is sort of the quietest person we've seen in justice in a long time, to come out and say, hey, Garland is a fair guy. He was appointed very carefully. He's not political, da-da-da-da-da. It was really and Trump's raising a huge amount of money on this. I mean, the fund I get Trump fundraisers for this.
Trump has a history of not listening to advisors, not listening to lawyers. If you remember, and often he comes out smelling like a rose. Remember the Access Hollywood tape? People were telling him you got to get out of the race,
right.
and he listened to Rudy Giuliani and his gut, and he stuck with it, and he was elected president. So in some respects, he's often right. I think he was calculating that maybe he was trying to stare down Jack Smith, thinking that he wasn't going to indict someone running for office. Or maybe he was thinking, man, I can make a lot of money out of this. But from reports of the reporters that were in the courtroom that day, he did seem fairly shaken by the seriousness of being indicted and facing potential jail time.
Well, and now he's at his rallies is talking about, how he's going to serve 400 years if found guilty because he's adding all of the, the maximum.
The right-wing media does that too. Newsmax does that often.
I would love to see him get 400 years. I'm sorry. because if I had done what he did, I'd get 400 years. And I've had my classification wasn't as high as his.
The one issue I've had I've had a number of issues with the coverage, but one of the issues with the coverage of this is people who say, well, this is all self-inflicted. Well, last time I checked, almost all crimes of this severity are self-inflicted on behalf of the accused. But putting that aside, given that Trump, was consistently given advice to try and head this off at the pass early, the fact that he is now knee deep in it, I have no sympathy for him, and I'm grateful for a legal system and a system in our country where he can cry and whine all he wants about the judge. He can call him all the names. I'm sorry, about the prosecutor that he wants, but he's still going to be dragged into court and held to account in front of a jury of his peers. And let's have at it.
If he settled in the fall, he would have had to admit that he had done something wrong, and he notoriously does not like to do that. I think he's
ever done that.
Right. I think that's true. He settles sometimes, but I think the Justice Department would have required some sort of admission.
The time he could have made this all go away was basically when they told him, if you don't give those back, you're in violation of major laws. And that's when Trump said, I'm more important than the law. I'm above the law. He still believes he could go out and shoot someone on the streets and still be elected president. And for all I know, it's true.
I may get criticized for what I'm about to say, but I mean, in the best case scenario, you think, because I agree with you, I think if what he said was true, I know, ha. But if what he said was true at the time, which was that he believed that he could declassify the documents, then you could make the argument of, okay, well, he believed that, good, bad, or indifferent, and he believed that, and that was the reason that it continued to go. Now with the tape, however, that he says, well, this is classified, but I took it, and it's mine, and I'm not giving it back.
And take a look.
Yeah, take a look. Take a look. That's pretty damning, and it doesn't work well then with this notion that, oh, this was just it got mixed up with my things.
This guy is either he wanted this fight or he's a really stupid criminal. Because if he wanted to keep the information,
or both,
we don't have to think. We don't have to think very creatively about how you could return all of those pieces of paper, but yet somehow magically retain the information contained on every one of those single pieces of paper. This man wanted this fight, and he's got it. So let's have at it.
You have to wonder among Trump supporters, what would it take for them to stop trusting Donald Trump? Would he have to murder someone, like in a
no, they
special...
would claim it was politically motivated.
Yeah,
Judy,
there's nothing.
I've thought a lot about that. The one thing I would say, and I heard this from a conservative commentator, the best defense of their mindset that I've heard was if you turn back the clock to even the day of Trump's inauguration, there were news stories saying that the Democrats were going to impeach him and remove him. So starting day one, this guy wasn't fit to be president, and he was going to be thrown out. And if you are an ally of his, for whatever reasons, all this has been white noise in the background of your faith for years now. And so as it's increased in severity, it's just louder white noise, but you haven't bothered to sort through it because you were skeptical about it, in some cases rightfully, from the beginning. So I'm not defending that view, but I'm just saying you have to put yourself into that mindset before you summarily dismiss where people are in this country. I
vividly remember watching the NBC Nightly News, and if it wasn't Nightly News, it could have been Brian Williams when he was on MSNBC, and it was either the day of the inauguration or the day before the inauguration, and he was talking about the Democratic efforts that okay, he's president now, but he probably won't be president for very long. And because they're going to work this and figure out how to get him out of there. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's a good point. It's been going on for a really, really, really long time. Jim?
Yeah, I think that's right. And in fact, if you analyze right-wing social media, I have colleagues who've done that. I have students who've looked at that. So, all the stuff that eventually became QAnon and things like that, they all go back to what you were saying at the beginning there, that, from day one, Trump had this group of people who felt, for whatever reason, he is our leader. He is the one who's going to make the revolution happen that we want. He's going to turn it into our country again. And he's played off of that continually and just grown that thing. So there's this group of people that no matter what he does, there's 30% who are going to support him. And I think, that's what's making it so hard for anyone else to run against him because, sort of, if you look at the kind of numbers DeSantis has and some of the other people have, those numbers wouldn't have been bad if this was an early part of the race and everything was open. When you've got 30% already locked up, right, you don't have a lot of room to play with.
We have a lot of letters. I want to get to those. We have many more topics. I want to get to those as well. And we have a terrific panel. So Judy, Patrick, Mark Wittman, and Jim Hendler, hang tight. We'll be back with your letters. Panel at WAMC.org. First News with Ray Graff. Listening to the music of Gaelic Storm performing at the Egg in Albany tomorrow night. That's June 16th, Friday, June 16th at 8 p.m. theegg.org for more information. theegg.org. And, I went to the Egg I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I hadn't been there since COVID. And I was just reminded by what a great venue that is. It's such a great place to see anything. It's queer, quirky, weird, and just very cool. So, if you get a chance, Gaelic Storm would be a good show to check out.
How are the acoustics there?
They're great.
Good.
Yeah.
They're amazing. They're just amazing. It's such a cool place to see a show. All right, let me move us just a little bit to the to some other to letters, and then we'll move on to other topics. And I know we could probably spend all morning on this, but I don't think anyone wants to do that. So we'll move ahead. And we welcome your letters at panel@wamc.org, panel@wamc.org. This letter came in from Kathleen. Trump will never go to jail because the Secret Service cannot give up to correction officers their obligation to protect him for life. I don't think that's going to be the main reason, but okay.
Oh, I had thought that he wasn't going to go to jail. I have heard that actually people in the system federally believe that there is a possibility. There are places that they keep witnesses who they want to protect, and those facilities are meant as much to keep the witness in as to protect their safety. And the discussion is that Trump, if need be, would be shipped off to one of these facilities. So I had previously said, well, he can't serve time in jail. What are they going to do? Put the Secret Service in there with him? But apparently there is a way to accommodate that should the country, the justice system decide that that's appropriate in the end.
And I'm not saying he's guilty. I'm not saying he's innocent, but they have time to build something.
Yeah, I don't even think they need to.
Brian says, I suspect that Trump will settle at the last minute to avoid jail time and agree to no longer hold any government office, just like Spiro Agnew. Then he gets to keep all those political contributions. I don't know.
I can't imagine that happening unless one of the contenders starts to suddenly show up, as someone who's likely to win the primaries, at which point you could see Trump saying, well, the Democrats forced me out. I can stay a kingmaker in this party and do it. But as long as he's the front runner, I can't imagine him.
But, I mean, we know this playbook. I mean, you lost the election, and you just keep saying you didn't. Yeah, I won. Yep. I won. So they didn't find me guilty. They acquitted me. Okay. Let's see. We go to Roger. Trump supporters are lemmings. They would follow him off a cliff. John, the facts are 1, no one is above the law. 2, Donald Trump committed crimes and should face a jury trial. No other conversations matter regarding politics, offices once held. No consideration should be made for the fact that Trump tripped into the office of president in the past because of cult followers. Republican Party antics and willingness to practice underhanded tactics in our ridiculous electoral system despite the popular vote. That from John. Lucian says, is it just me, or does it seem strange that Trump is still walking the streets? If any other human being did what Trump did, wouldn't all electronic devices in that resort, as well as all visitors questioned and their devices been confiscated? This was not a home. It's a resort where many people come and go. With the sensitivity of what he had, why wasn't he remanded? He should be in a vinyl cell. What do you all think?
Well, and did they do a search of the Bedminster property as well? Because clearly, according to the indictment, they were sending boxes up there as well. And did they check out the Trump Tower?
I looked that up yesterday. I could not find any record of them searching Bedminster or Trump Tower.
Right, and they may have done so without us knowing that.
Correct.
But the other thing I haven't seen a lot is of how much damage, if any, has there been done to the national security because of the potential leaks to this? Did they, have all the people quoted in the documents been alerted that they may be compromised? I have no idea what the scope of the potential damage has been.
Yeah, well, there's, and we will never know that unless you're very deep inside the system, which of course gets into a whole another set of conspiracy levels. But I think Bob Griffin yesterday said that quite well. That so the problem is a lot of other people than Donald Trump knew those documents were there, including people who wanted to see those documents and could easily have been getting in there. So, we have no idea what the Russians know, the Iranians know, anyone else from those. So, yeah, and those documents were all about what we knew about those people, the sources, things. So, I mean, this is, from a security breach point of view, this is probably the most serious security breach of national security that potentially has ever happened. And, the fact that that's not getting aired at that level is weird. And part of that is because until you know exactly what's in the documents, it's hard to justify that. But it reveals sources. It reveals the presidential brief each day takes thousands of things that have been collected and boils it down to 2 or 3 key points. And it's about a 30-page PowerPoint. And in fact, most presidents actually see it every day. Trump was actually famous for not watching the intelligence briefs unless there was some issue he cared about, or if it was not competing with something he wanted to watch on TV. But these, whether he has the actual original documents, whether he has the presidential summaries, I saw literally only one example of one photo that was in one of these documents, and that was just about the highest security clearance I ever needed just to discuss how that kind of thing could be handled. So really, it's the fact that these things reveal to our adversaries how we do things. Now, we can argue about should we, can we, is it ethical? Is it ethical for them to do it to us? But, this is a very complex system. And what was revealed in, all we've been able to see is sort of what a classified document has this cover page, and all it says on it is what the level of classification is. And, just the picture of what was on the floor made those of us who knew classification nervous. Seeing boxes and boxes of this in a bathroom, I mean, it's just insane. And, it really is the case. I would have
from the inside, though, John. From the inside.
It would have been nice, The other thing is,
unlike
he
a garage door. Yes.
So actually, a question I have is, at what point in the process? So if this was somebody else coming out of this yesterday, would they have either been, at what point is either bail or, the electric ring that's put around your.
What about the young airman from Massachusetts, the air guardsman from Massachusetts, who was just trying to show off to his friends, and all that sensitive information got all the way around the world. He's facing some serious time.
Do you remember, within the first month, maybe it was 6 weeks into the Trump administration, when I think the then president, went down to Mar-a-Lago, they had the picture of people who were attending a wedding holding the nuclear football and taking selfies with it. Maybe that was an omen. Maybe that was.
We had a lot of omens.
I agree with you. But
that was your first clue, Joe.
Well, I mean, that was really early on. Yeah. That it was. Oh, we're going to take this, and now we're going to make it a party favor, and get your picture taken with a pony. Or nuclear secrets and the button. All right, I'm going to change the subject only slightly and just want to focus in on Merrick Garland for a second. Merrick Garland on Wednesday afternoon defended the Justice Department's classified documents investigation of former President Donald Trump, who has been calling Jack Smith, the special counsel in charge of the probe, a thug and a lunatic. In his first public comments since Trump was indicted last week, Garland would not answer specific questions about the investigation, but said he had faith in the integrity of the probe and would let the indictment and future court filings speak for the Justice Department. Quote, Mr. Smith is a veteran career prosecutor. He has assembled a group of talented prosecutors and agents who share his commitment to integrity and the rule of law. Garland said at an event at the Justice Department headquarters focused on reducing violent crime. Any questions about this matter will have to be answered by their filings in court. What else do you say if you're Merrick Garland?
Right. What else do you say? But the big question I have for Merrick Garland is, when did Jack Smith come to you with the case, and when did you give the approval to go ahead? Because when exactly did that happen? I'm kind of curious about that, because that has been my understanding all along, is that Jack Smith was going to gather together evidence for a case and present it to Garland, who had to do thumbs up or thumbs down, and obviously he did thumbs up at some point. When did that happen? Just curious.
Can I ask a question, and maybe letter writers know this, or someone on the panel? My understanding of what Merrick Garland's role now is that he can't take the place in terms of judgment of Jack Smith's judgment. He can, and I looked this up in something from the Brookings Institute, if there's something so, quote-unquote, inappropriate or unwarranted that it violates department practices, then Garland can blow the whistle and take a different course. But as long as Jack Smith stays in the lane in terms of practices, Merrick Garland doesn't get to substitute his own discretion or decisions for those of Jack Smith. That's what I understood. So when you say, I think we just should be careful, because if that's true, Garland doesn't give a thumbs up or thumbs down. Garland basically signs off on the work and says, you stayed inside of policies and you've come to your own conclusion. I'm out.
I agree. That is, as I understand it, that's what the independent counsel law is all about. In other words, the minute it was handed over to an independent counsel, that's the DOJ saying, we don't want this to be, quote, political, unquote.
And not to be stupid, but or dance about this, but hence independent, right? I mean, that's the whole point.
Right.
Yeah, and the news, if what I've read is true, again, one of my other criticisms of the news media coverage of this is they're far less clear about Garland's role than they should be.
Judy, would you like to defend the news media in this?
I know that they had to take it to Garland at some point, and Garland had to tell them whether or not they can proceed. But I don't know whether it was just one, whether there are other pieces of that. For example, that New Jersey Bedminster aspect of the dissemination, is that a separate case, and what's going on with January 6th?
All right, let's move on to other topics, and we'll see what other things we can find here. We welcome your letters, panel at WAMC.org, panel at WAMC.org. So we only have a few minutes before the bottom of the hour break, so this story seems like it'll be it will be just about the right timing. The Republican-led House voted to table a measure Wednesday that would censure Representative Adam Schiff, the Democrat of California, for pressing allegations that former President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign colluded with Russia. 20 Republicans voted with Democrats to table the measure, effectively killing it, in a vote of 225 to 196. 2 Republicans and 5 Democrats voted present. The resolution also sought to fine Schiff, the former House Intelligence Committee chairman, $16 million, which its sponsor, Representative Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, says is half the cost of an investigation into an alleged collusion. Luna introduced the measure Tuesday, the same day Trump was arraigned in a federal courthouse in Miami on charges that he broke the law dozens of times by keeping and hiding classified documents. Luna's measure was a privileged resolution, which meant that under House rules, it had to be considered by Thursday. The resolution alleged that Schiff purposely deceived the committee, Congress, and the American people, and used his position and access to sensitive information to instigate a fraudulently based investigation.
All politics, definitely all politics, and it's from my perspective, I was stunned the fact that this got tabled, which essentially kills it. That some Republicans, I think there were 11 or 12, 20 felt that they needed to vote to table it, which essentially kills it. That it was so outlandish. Can you imagine bringing a congressperson to trial for essentially stuff they say in court? I mean, there are a lot of people in Congress over the years who could have been hauled before a court, and if that was the case, I mean, it's interesting that it says the Trump team and this idea of Russian collusion. If you actually read the Mueller report, there were plenty of instances where Russia was involved in the 2016 election. Whether or not they had direct contact with Donald Trump, that was never proven. But there's plenty of indications that Russia wanted Donald Trump elected and worked very hard to make it happen.
Mark?
I think the resolution was absurd. And I agree with Judy in that regard. But let's get Adam Schiff right. I mean, that guy is dangerous. He makes a lot of impertinent statements. He made assertions during the impeachment related to the Ukraine about whether or not his committee had spoken to a witness that the Washington Post gave him 4 Pinocchios for when he denied that interaction with the witness. And then even on Meet the Press, when he was privy to information that most other human beings on this planet weren't about the Trump campaign interactions with Russia, he said things like, well, I've seen this private information, and I'm giving you a paraphrase of a quote, the size and scope of which is probably beyond Watergate. He did abuse his access to privileged information in a way to intentionally disadvantage the president. So should he have been sanctioned and charged for this? Of course not. Should Adam Schiff be running around doing what he does on a regular basis? The answer to that is, of course not.
And he's running for U.S. senator to replace Dianne Feinstein at this point.
And let's see, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene, we have Gates. I mean, look, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
What about him, though?
Schiff did not. I have my own issues with Schiff politicizing things, but I'll tell you, compared to a lot of other things that were coming out at that time, a lot of things being done by other people, Schiff was not extreme. And I'm sorry, I know you disagree with me.
But the standard for political conduct in this country should not be, let's find the worst violator, and as long as we're inside of those rules, we're okay.
No, but Schiff broke no laws, none of the stated rules. And you can question whether he tread on the gray areas because there's a lot of them, and that I might agree with you on. But
the Washington Post determined that he said something that got him 4 Pinocchios, which I believe is their highest number of Pinocchios.
He said a thing that got him 4 Pinocchios, unlike, let's say, anyone else you can name from the other side who got, let's see, how many Pinocchios, how many times did Trump get?
Yeah, but what's our standard?
30,000 times?
I just like that our legal standard is Pinocchios.
Yeah. But well, the point is the Washington Post in this group is accepted as a pretty reasonable arbiter.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's why I'm using it.
They fact check it.
But he also said ridiculous things on Meet the Press about what the information he had. So, Jim, I
don't know if you're aware of this, and I apologize if you are, but he's a politician.
Yeah. I get it. But I get it, and we're saying, look, there's a standard here that we can, as long as he's better than Marjorie Taylor Greene, we're okay with our politicians.
No,
we're
not. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is the role he played on the committees he played, the things he does. He was a lead prosecutor on an indictment, on an impeachment. I mean, these are things where an awful lot happens, and they're very political. I actually liked his quote. I'm flattered by it, but the fact that Speaker McCarthy would take up this resolution when we have so many pressing challenges before the country is really a terrible abuse of
You know what
House
a man of
resources.
honor says? A man of honor says, I don't believe I should have been subject to such terrible sanction, but I too do take responsibility for the shortcomings in my actions. That's what an honorable person does.
I think this was just used to further the right-wing narrative that Russia had nothing to do with the election of Donald Trump, because they still like to beat that drum. I hear it every day when you go on right-wing media, and that the Democrats were wrong to even investigate it.
And, I mean, two things. To Jim's point from a moment ago, the House of Representatives is basically on pause now while they figure out things with between McCarthy and the right wing fringe. They got to figure that out, and not only that, but you do have people like George Santos who are still sitting on committees while you're talking about the legitimacy of Adam Schiff. I understand your point, Mark, but I know it's the old two wrongs don't make a right. But I don't. But obviously, it's politicized, and the fact that you even had Republican support to just say, okay, let's move on, seems to be
that I actually thought was the most encouraging part of this. That they're starting because we've actually seen some legislation that was bipartisan. To give Biden his due, he's been a master at that all his career, and he really has pulled off some amazing things. President, we're seeing fights within their own coalitions on both parties, don't get me wrong there. But what I really found encouraging is that we're starting to see a group of Republicans and a group of Democrats who may be starting to say, maybe we got to start paying attention to America again. And stop worrying quite so much about our careers and our base and getting primary. Let's make this stuff, let's make this country work.
Great again.
Another great part of that story is the idea that
let's make this country great.
There's a mechanism in the Congress where they can introduce something, and 2 days later it will be adopted or voted on. Wow, speed!
Yeah, that's great.
Who knew?
Yeah, wish we could. I was thinking about that. I was like, be nice if we could use that more often. I can get you an answer by Thursday. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue and wrap up. We welcome you, panel at WAMC.org, panel at WAMC.org. News is next from the BBC.
Murder in the air, where you want the sun, the ocean to swim in, tobacco run.
Good morning. Thank you very much for being with us, wrapping up our panel session for this Thursday, the 15th of June. Judy, Patrick, Mark Wittman, and Jim Hendler making up the group, and we welcome you in your letters, panel at WAMC.org, panel at WAMC.org. All right, so let's go to the AI story for the day, and Jim, we'll give this one to you because you're the only one who understands it.
No, this is actually an interesting one in that the European Parliament moves on things a little bit differently than we do, and it's a consensus-building entity. But the main thing is that they have voted to take up AI regulation in such a way that there will be a law passed within the next couple of years. And it's really, fascinating. Now, full disclosure, I work for a non-lobbying entity. It's the largest professional community organization for computer scientists. It's called the Association for Computing Machinery, and I chair the global technology policy, which has put some input into this. But the thing that's really nice about it is they realized this could not be a monolithic law, that you couldn't just say, yes, you can use it, no, you can't. So what they did is they've created a set of categories, right? This stuff we don't really care about. It's not going to hurt anyone. This stuff we want to be careful about because it could, affect human rights and civil rights. This one we really want to be careful about because we're talking about things that can kill people. And they actually had 4 levels. I won't go into the details. But so they're going to negotiate through that. How it's going to work through, how it's going to be done is hard to say. But, in the U.S., we tend to have a regulatory system that limits our government but gives tremendous freedom to companies, right? In China, it's just the opposite. So China recently passed some AI regulations, which basically says companies can't keep much of their information. They have to give it to the government and not share it. Europe comes in somewhere in the middle and really says we have to balance the rights of governments to protect people versus people's, ability the capitalist ability. We do want to have big companies here, but we don't want to see these mega corporations able to control everything. They've just taken another big step against Google and things like that. So in the AI regulations, they've been unquestionably the leaders, and their primary emphasis previously has been on privacy. When you use these AI systems, you're sharing information with a company, which then has the right to share it with anyone they want except the U.S. government, and that requires a subpoena. And some of what's out there is stunning. Fran and I have often talked about this, but I teach a course on just how much data is out there about you, and who's collecting it, and what they're doing it, and who they're selling it to, and even my graduate students in computer science are stunned when they learn what the reality is. Europe had the best laws. They just were not. It's just hard to internationally enforce something that's only passed by part of the world. These AI laws, what I think the impact will be when they finally pass. So if you look at GDPR, you go to a lot of websites now and it says, here's our cookies policy. Most people ignore that. But in fact, that's important. And that's because they don't want to have one version in the U.S. and a different version in Europe and a different version somewhere else. And these AI laws are going to do that same thing. So they're going to have to be much more careful. Some of these big companies are going to have to figure out, how they want to deal with government and government regulations in Europe and how that's going to impact U.S. In the U.S., we have a lot going on in this. Senator Schumer has recently been meeting with a lot of people from the corporate sector. He's meeting with my group. His staff is meeting with my group this afternoon. We have some other people, he's met with. I think there was a group of 20 or 30. Actually, it was about 50 Congress people and a good mix of the parties. So people are really.
I was hoping he was meeting with 50
Cent
Cent
regarding AI.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So again, the good news is we're starting to see people who realize that this very, very powerful and useful technology, right, if unregulated, is going to belong to a few very large companies, because it costs $100 million to do one training run of these things. ChatGPT does hundreds and hundreds of training runs before it releases something. So we're talking about things that really only the biggest entities with the most money can possibly do, and that means it's government and industry. And Europe is trying to find that balance. So it's really fascinating.
It is fascinating, and that was a great explanation. There's one part of the article, though, and you may have addressed it, and I just missed how it applies here. But in the first paragraph of the article, it talks about how this is going to lap the United States and be on a collision course with the U.S. So what does that collision course look like? Because I didn't read that as a good thing.
So, again, let's use an analogy that goes back a few years. Europe passed a set of privacy laws that were very different than the U.S. privacy laws. So you could say that's that clash. Right. The good news for us as U.S. citizens is these multinational companies are now complying with that law, at least to some degree in the U.S., just because they don't want to have to build everything twice and things like that. Right. The clash here is that the U.S. is moving to regulate really impact, who can use it, how they can do it, how to, again, it's really interesting. The CEO of OpenAI, the company that released ChatGPT and has caused a lot of this madness about how AI is going to kill us all by 10 years from now. Apparently only 40% of CEOs believe that AI will kill us all by 2033. He came to the U.S. and said, I want to be regulated. And then the minute Europe started talking about this regulation, he's published, I'm seriously opposed to how Europe is regulating AI, right? The U.S. companies want to write the rules. Europe has a very different model, which says government's job is to protect the people, right? And, I mean, theoretically, that should be true everywhere. China is really into authoritarian control and is using AI centrally. U.S., again, is into capitalism and says, look, we have these mega companies that wouldn't be here in the U.S. if it hadn't been for our open regulation. And Europe is saying, let's find the balance. So it definitely is a clash. It's just it's not sort of like this head-to-head, we want to do it this way and you want to do it that way. It's that the U.S. is way behind. We're lagging on this stuff. And Europe has kind of, I think, woken us up to the fact that we'd better start thinking about what laws we want to pass in this space.
I have a question, Jim, which is the article I read, and there's a good one in The Economist about this that summarizes the various approaches, says that the EU is protecting against breaches in privacy, bias, and they're also trying to protect intellectual property. I've also heard that AI is going to kill us all. You've dismissed that. Is there anything between the three that the EU is protecting against and kill us all that we should also be worried about? I'm always mystified by what the real risk is here.
So a lot of people are, including all of us who do this stuff. So think about it this way, right? You have a tool, right? Here's a hammer, right? Hammers can be used for good things and hammers can be used for bad things, but the damage that the hammer can do is pretty limited, and so it's pretty easy to say, our current laws on who's allowed to hit who with what cover hammers.
Yeah.
Okay. Now take a machine gun, not an AR-15 because I don't want to get political, but let's take a real machine gun, right? Right now you have to be in the U.S. military and approved, and you sell one of those to someone outside the military within the U.S., so you're breaking a law.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a tool that can be used theoretically, quote, constructively in warfare, assuming you assume warfare is ever constructive, but you're limiting its use. And then, you can move up to nuclear bombs. So the real question is, where is AI on that statement? And what a lot of us believe is it's moved from hammer to chainsaw.
Okay.
So with a chainsaw, A, you can hurt yourself a lot if you don't know what you're doing. B, you can hurt other people. But by and large, it can also be used for a lot of very important things that you can't do without a chainsaw.
Yeah.
The question is, do we let it move to machine gun where you stop seeing some of those positive uses? And some of these people are saying it's more like a nuclear bomb.
But what's the machine gun threat from this?
We could go into
but just give me.
I was going to say we're doing Vox Pop on AI on January 20th.
But in 20 seconds, give me the machine gun threat that I should start thinking about.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes. By the way.
Basically, it's if we allow autonomy to these systems, if we allow these systems to make decisions that currently have a human in the loop, right? And we do it inappropriately or wrongly. So what most people are worried about is misuse of these. So I'll give you a simpler one, right? Misinformation. It's now that video of the Pentagon bombing that was fake, right? And there's a question: was that done for stock manipulation? Was that? But broke no laws in the U.S. In Europe, it would have broken a law. Okay, but we just heard, that the Beatles, that a new Beatles song is coming out because they've been able to use AI to recreate it, right? How it should really have sounded and the four voices, and so there's something where the same exact thing has been. In one case, it was used. So
there's
fakely.
Blasphemy.
That's what I'm saying. So in one case, it was used in a fake way, in another, badly. In another way, it was used in a, quote, fake way, unquote, potentially positively. And the question is, how do we as society deal with something that's that fast-moving and where